Most horror films begin with a writer staring at a blank page, but some pages were never blank to begin with. Across the history of the genre, there are scripts that arrived under circumstances no one could fully explain, stories that poured out of their creators, as if dictated by an unseen presence. Screenwriters waking from dreams they couldn't shake, directors claiming scenes appeared fully written overnight, drafts surfacing without authors, and, in the end, a film that feels less crafted than summoned. These are not tales of conventional inspiration. They are accounts of people who wrote without remembering, who finished scripts they couldn't recall starting, who felt watched while their hands kept moving across the page. And when those stories reached the screen, they carried the same strange energy, fragmented logic, dreamlike images, and a sense that something inside the film is reaching outward. Tonight, we open that collection. 15 films, 15 scripts, all rumored to have been shaped or steered by forces just outside the frame. If you've ever wondered where nightmares come from, or what happens when a writer stops being the one in control, this is the journey you've been waiting for. Let's step into the quiet places where stories don't just haunt the screen, they haunt the hands that wrote them. Fact has shown, the Norless Tapes, 1973. He isolated himself for a week. No visitors, no breaks, no sleep that anyone could confirm. When the door finally opened, the script existed, but the man who wrote it seemed unsure how it had come to be. William F. Nolan had always been a disciplined, deliberate writer, but the screenplay for the Norless Tapes emerged from him in a blur, as if time folded around the act of writing. He later said the pages felt pre-assembled, like a story he was merely uncovering, not creating. And then, just as abruptly, the original draft vanished. Not misfiled, not misplaced, gone. All that remained were secondary copies and a series of reel-to-reel recordings, fragments of Nolan's voice recounting ideas, some of which cut out mid-sentence, as though something muted him. The eerie part? Those disrupted thoughts still ended up in the final script, word for word. The film's narrative, a skeptical journalist investigating supernatural phenomena, is constructed through disjointed tapes and incomplete notes. The fiction echoes the method of its creation, fragmented, jagged, almost too aware of itself. Watching it feels like listening to a man trying to recall what he was never meant to forget. Some scripts are written with intention, others feel like remnants of a conversation you were never meant to overhear. Fact #2, the Mesto Waltz, 1971. The script didn't feel written, it felt performed. That's how Ben Maddow described the night the story for the Mesto Waltz took over his desk. Maddow, normally a meticulous craftsman, claimed that the entire first draft arrived in a single, breathless surge. No pauses, no second guessing, just page after page forming beneath his hands, as though the ideas were stepping forward on their own. He later said the experience felt like being carried downriver by a current he couldn't see, only hear. When producers attempted to modify the script, something resisted. Corrections disappeared. Dialogue reverted. Entire sections resurfaced after being deleted. One editor swore the pages restored themselves when left unattended. The film, centered around a pianist overtaken by the soul of a dying occultist, mirrors the sensation of its birth. Elegant, unnerving, and strangely predetermined, its rhythms feel less like cinematic pacing and more like a ritual unfolding measured beats, dark crescendos, a sense of inevitability. Maddow never replicated the process. He called the script an intrusion, something that arrived complete and left just as suddenly. Sometimes a story isn't written for the audience. Sometimes it's written for the writer and uses his hands to get out. Fact #3, The Shuttered Room, 1967. The screenplay for The Shuttered Room is credited to several hands, yet no one can unanimously say who delivered the version used on set. The deeper you dig into its history, the more the truth seems to dissolve. Writers were brought in, replaced, and brought back again, each claiming they'd contributed only fragments. Yet the final script contains scenes none of them recognized. One writer insisted he found pages written in his style but not his wording. Another said he received revisions from a contact address that turned out to be abandoned years earlier. What emerged on film is a story stitched together with unnerving precision, as though someone or something curated the chaos. The pacing slips between lucid and dreamlike, the dialogue feels overheard rather than composed, and the atmosphere hums with the unsettling logic of a nightmare you can't quite trace. Some scripts are collaborative effort. Others feel like they've been assembled by an unseen editor. Fact #4, The Night Digger, 1971. Patricia Neal didn't just read the script, she recognized it. in ways she couldn't explain. Still recovering from a devastating stroke, she found herself staring into scenes that echoed fears and memories she never voiced aloud. Roald Dahl, credited with writing the screenplay, later admitted that much of it arrived through recurring dreams. He described waking with vivid images, lonely houses, oppressive silence, a woman unable to escape her own past and writing them before they faded. But parts of the draft weren't in his handwriting, and neither he nor Neil accepted ownership of certain additions. The film carries that fractured intimacy. Characters react to dangers the audience never sees. Emotions surface without origin. The world feels simultaneously familiar and alien, as if borrowed from a life only half remembered. This wasn't a story constructed from imagination. It was one pulled from somewhere deeper, somewhere neither of them meant to touch. Fact #5, The Evil, 1978. It began with an envelope that never arrived because no one ever delivered it. Yet the script for The Evil appeared on a desk one morning, typed, bound, and completely unclaimed. The only instruction stamped across the front read, "Leave it as it is." The production team ignored the warning, and the script did not take kindly to interference. Every attempt to adjust the material was undone. Edits vanished from typewriters. Revisions refused to print. In one instance, rewritten dialogue reappeared exactly as the original, same spacing, same errors mere hours after being changed. By the time shooting began, the crew accepted they were no longer in control. The final film feels like a story fighting against its own structure. Scenes lash forward abruptly, motives shift without warning, and the narrative bends towards something that feels older than the characters inhabiting it. The chaos isn't accidental, it feels enforced. Sometimes a story survives because it is protected, sometimes because it is determined to be told, with or without you. Fact cancelletose, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, 1971. The image always returned. A woman rising from the water, silent, faceless, and impossibly still. Lee Kalchheim didn't set out to write a horror script. He simply wanted the dream to stop. Night after night, the same apparition crept into his sleep. The lake, the mist, the empty eyes. By the time he began writing, the scenes arrived in fragments like pieces of a memory he had never lived through. He didn't outline or structure the story. Instead, he followed the mood, letting the unease shape the narrative. What makes Let's Scare Jessica to Death unnerving isn't its supernatural hints, it's the suffocating quiet behind them. The world feels fragile, as though a whisper could cause it to collapse. Every character speaks with the weight of something unspoken. Every silence feels like it's being observed. After the film wrapped, Kalchheim destroyed his drafts and refused to elaborate on the dream any further. Some visions fade after waking, others simply wait for the next night. Fact #7, Alucarda, 1977. Juan Lopez Moctezuma didn't recall writing Alucarda. He recalled being ill, feverish, delirious, drifting in and out of consciousness. The rest was a blur. According to those who stayed by his bedside, he spoke in torrents during his illness. Names, chants, descriptions of rituals, the outline of a story soaked in blood and hysteria. A friend wrote everything down, convinced it was incoherent rambling. But when Moctezuma recovered, those pages formed a full narrative, violent, unbound, and disturbingly coherent. The film that emerged reeks of fever logic. Characters don't evolve, they erupt. Scenes bleed into one another with manic urgency. It feels less crafted than convulsed onto the screen. Moctezuma later confessed he felt disconnected from the finished film, as if he'd merely hosted its creation, not directed it. Sometimes a story chooses the body it needs, and sometimes that body is too weak to protest. Fact #7, Alucarda, 1977. Juan Lopez Moctezuma didn't recall writing Alucarda. He recalled being ill, feverish, delirious, drifting in and out of consciousness. The rest was a blur. According to those who stayed by his bedside, he spoke in torrents during his illness. Names, chants, descriptions of rituals, the outline of a story soaked in blood and hysteria. A friend wrote everything down, convinced it was incoherent, rambling. But when Moctezuma recovered, those pages formed a full narrative, violent, unbound, and disturbingly coherent. The film that emerged reeks of fever logic. Characters don't evolve, they erupt. Scenes bleed into one another with manic urgency. It feels less crafted than convulsed onto the screen. Moctezuma later confessed he felt disconnected from the finished film, as if he'd merely hosted its creation, not directed it. Sometimes a story chooses the body it needs, and sometimes that body is too weak to protest. Fact #8, Next of Kin, 1980. 982. Certain scenes mirrored personal events in the lead actress's life. Conversations she remembered having decades before appeared word for word in the margins. When she asked who had accessed her biography, the answer was simple: no one. Attempts to track down the listed writer led nowhere. The name had no public record, no credits, no physical address. It was as if someone had invented a person just to sign the script and then erase them. Next of kin feels like memory masquerading as fiction. Keep the door locked. Fact #9. The sender, 1982. Every night at precisely 3:11 a.m., Thomas Baum woke with the same jolt, heart racing, breath shallow, and a single phrase ricocheting inside his skull: he dreams you back. At first, he scribbled down the visions out of desperation, but the more he wrote, the less the dreams felt like his. They were vivid, structured, almost cinematic hospitals folding into corridors of shadow, a young man collapsing reality into nightmare, and a presence Baum couldn't name watching from behind the scenes. The notebook filled itself. The story simply unfolded. When he finished what would become the script for The Sender, Baum realized he had no true memory of shaping its plot. It felt like transcription, he later said, not invention. The film pulses with that same eerie logic, part dream, part intrusion. Characters drift through scenes as if guided by someone else's subconscious. The boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolve, leaving the viewer unsure whose mind they're trapped inside. Once the film wrapped, the nightmares stop, almost too abruptly, as if the dreams had served their purpose. Fact #0. Messiah of Evil, 1973. Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz believed they were writing a simple horror film until their dreams synchronized. Both writers claimed to see the same image: a seaside town devoid of reflections. No mirrors, no windows that cast back a face. Just citizens staring, unblinking, as if waiting for something to arrive. When they compared notes, they realized their dream dialogues matched almost line for line. As the script progressed, new pages appeared without explanation. Actors reported receiving rewrites. No one recalled distributing. One performer insisted the pages were damp with the scent of the ocean, though production was miles from the coast. The finished film feels like a broadcast from another consciousness, one unfixed in time. Scenes drift, logic bends. The world on screen refuses to behave like a world at all. It resembles a memory of a nightmare rather than the nightmare itself. When asked who wrote the ending, both writers gave the same answer: I thought you did. Fact #9. The Keep, 1983. The screenplay for The Keep didn't reshape itself, it unraveled itself. Michael Mann approached the adaptation with precision, but his drafts began drifting from their structure. Scenes he carefully arranged slid out of order. Entire sequences appeared in places he'd never placed them. The more he tried to reassemble the narrative, the more it resisted, as if the story preferred chaos to clarity. He later admitted he started dreaming of the fortress at the center of the plot. Sometimes it loomed as stone, sometimes it pulsated like a living organ. He walked its corridors in his sleep, yet woke with no memory of reaching the exit. Actors arrived to set disoriented, shooting scenes they had not rehearsed. Editors struggled with footage that seemed determined to remain incomplete. Shots vanished, audio warped, yet the presence of the fortress, the oppressive silence around it, remained intact. The film that survived the editing room is fractured, incomplete. But its incompleteness is a kind of message, a warning carved in stone. Some places don't want to be explored. Some stories don't want to be solved. Fact #0. Deathbed, the bed that eats, 1977. George Barry didn't set out to make a cult relic. In fact, for almost 30 years, he forgot he'd made it at all. The concept for Deathbed came from a dream that clung to him like fog, an ornate bed swallowing anyone who dared rest upon it. He wrote the script quickly, filmed it with quiet determination, and then nothing. The project slipped out of his memory as though it had never existed. No lingering pride, no lingering shame, just a void. Decades later, he stumbled across a discussion online about a bizarre, surreal horror film with no traceable origin. Only when he watched it did he realize he had once created it, yet whole sections felt alien scenes. He didn't recall shooting, voiceover passages he couldn't connect to his own writing. The narration sounded like a confession, but not his. The movie unfolds like a dream someone else had on his behalf. Illogical, poetic, unsettling. A story told by an unconscious mind that refuses to wake up. Barry later said the strangest part wasn't forgetting the film. It was realizing the film had never forgotten him. Fact #3. Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, 1973. Some films feel assembled, others feel conjured. Lamora belongs to the latter. Director Richard Blackburn maintained he co-wrote the script with Robert Fern, but when asked about specific sequences, both men denied authorship. The production was littered with small anomalies. Revised pages found where no one had placed them, dialogue inserted that mimicked neither writer's style, new scenes quietly added to shooting schedules without explanation. The movie itself glides like a dream overheard. A young girl enters a decaying world where innocence and corruption blend into something predatory. Nothing feels staged, yet everything feels arranged. The shadows move as though aware. The silence breathes. The original script, if it ever existed, was never located. No drafts, no notes, only the final film, as if it arrived fully formed. Some stories don't need a writer, only a doorway. Fact Hesson 4. The Visitor, 1979. Giulio Paradisi claimed he didn't so much create the script for The Visitor as endure it. What began as a straightforward concept mutated into a sprawling fever dream of telekinetic children, cosmic battles, and prophetic violence. Paradisi described the writing process as being swept under, overwhelmed by ideas he couldn't control. Scenes manifested in his mind with alarming clarity, images he said he wouldn't have imagined in his sanest hour. Crew members received handwritten fragments with no known source. Dialogue arrived, scrawled on scraps of paper. Paradisi would emerge from sleepless nights, insisting the story had grown while I was away. The final film is a chaotic collision of imagery and tone, wild, hypnotic, impossible to categorize. It moves with the logic of a vision, not a script. Afterward, Paradisi admitted he hadn't written anything since. Whatever that was, he said, it didn't leave room for anything else. Fact Hesson 5. Dark August, 1976. The script for Dark August did not arrive through the usual channels. It arrived like an inheritance. Director Martin Goldman received a weathered journal in the mail. No sender, no note, only a dark leather cover etched with a symbol he didn't recognize. Inside were pages filled with sketches, fragmented sentences, and a detailed sequence of events for a film he'd never discussed publicly. The outline was complete, almost too complete. When Goldman attempted to alter the material, things slipped off course. Actors forgot lines they'd known for weeks. Cameras malfunctioned only during rewritten scenes. A revised section was found mysteriously torn out the following morning, though no crew member had been near the set. The final film feels as though it's obeying instructions written somewhere outside the frame. Its pacing is hesitant, its fear personal, like someone whispering a warning the characters can't quite hear. That strange symbol from the journal appears repeatedly in the film's imagery, though Goldman never recalls intentionally including it. After production, he locked the journal away. When asked years later whether he still had it, he paused for a long moment before answering. I'm not sure if I kept it or if it kept me. Some stories don't ask to be told. They simply expect obedience. Bonus pick, Paperhouse, 1988. Before we leave these shadowed origins behind, there is one more film that belongs among them. Paperhouse feels less like a movie and more like a dream someone is trying to remember before it slips away. Screenwriter Matthew Jacobs said the scenes came to him fully formed upon waking soft, delicate, and frightening in an unexplainable way. He didn't plan them. He didn't outline them. They were simply waiting for him each morning. The story follows a young girl whose sketches manifest in the fevered landscape of her imagination. What begins as innocent creativity slowly distorts, revealing a world governed not by fantasy but by fear. The house she draws grows colder, the boy she draws starts watching her. Every line she adds tightens the nightmare. Jacobs later described certain scenes as borrowed, as though he'd retrieved them rather than invented them. He even admitted that revisiting the film felt like revisiting a dream he wasn't entirely sure belonged to him. Some stories come from inspiration, others arrive like memories from a life you never lived. If these stories unsettled you, remember, they troubled their creators first. The world of horror is filled with tales that never began on an empty page, scripts whispered into existence, ideas that refuse to let go, stories that choose their storytellers. And this is only the beginning. If you want to continue exploring the films that lie just beyond the edge of explanation, you're welcome to stay close. There are more shadows waiting.